In today's episode, we're talking about supply chain planning and execution, and how strategy and technology are accelerating the work of making and moving physical goods. Planning is the brains of the operation, uniting the supply chain across functions and across the globe. If you think of the 0-100 loop as an infinity symbol, combining the supply side with the demand side, planning sits right at the center. Today we'll be discussing the future of planning and execution from three unique perspectives: research strategy, business implementation, and AI technology. I'm Catherine Parry, Head of Communications at 0-100. Previously, I spent 15 years leading supply chain communications at global companies including Unilever and Diageo. But I usually prefer to work behind the scenes. So let me talk about our three guests joining today's episode. First, we'll speak with Steve Hochman from our research team about the new 0-100 Regenerative Business Planning framework. Next, we'll speak with an old friend and colleague of mine, Juan Carlos Parada, Global Head of Customer Operations at Unilever. He's leading a major transformation at the CPG company, evolving how they plan and execute across their global supply chain. And finally, we'll speak with Era Technology CEO Fred Laluyaux about how AI-powered decision intelligence connects the dots between insights and execution. First, let's speak with Steve from 0-100 about the new Regenerative Business Planning framework.
My name is Steve Hochman. I'm a research vice president at 0-100, and we advise organizations across industry on trends in supply chain innovation, always looking around the corner at what's next to figure out how to accelerate transformations. I am a supply chain veteran in many respects, an operator as much as an analyst. 20 plus years in supply chain with a combination of startups and large companies. Probably the one that's most recognizable to you would be Nike, where I spent a decade, led global supply chain strategy for the company, as well as playing a bunch of operating and line roles. And have a consulting background as well as an operator background, consulting to Fortune 500 companies in supply chain transformations.
Can you tell me about the state of supply chain planning today? I imagine it's gone through a lot of change in recent years.
So a little bit of history as we talk about the answer to what's happening today. In the 1980s, when supply chains were simpler, the notion of planning was essentially conceived around what you need to do to balance supply and demand inside a single factory. So planners were figuring out how to respond to orders that were coming into that single factory and trying to figure out how to flow materials at the right time and place to be able to deliver on time against those sales orders. Very simple. That then as supply chains themselves globalized and companies, the sort of the multinational model became more of the norm, then sometime around the 1990s, we had a need for more cross-functional alignment at a multi-plant and even at enterprise level. Still across the demand and supply side, but specifically around commercial and operational alignment. The short acronym for that, or not so short, is Sales and Operations Planning, which is S&OP. That was invented in the 1990s, roughly early 1990s. A lot of companies still use that construct today, but there was a subsequent evolution as companies realized the tens of billions of dollars you could actually add to the bottom line simply by aligning better and more proactively the way that S&OP drove, that if you could bring in even more stakeholders, particularly finance and general management, into that same alignment process, you could even move that much more nimbly and generate that much more predictability in terms of not just your supply demand, but even your earnings, right? And so that became, there was a new acronym attached to that more expansive view of integrated planning. It was called Integrated Business Planning, or IBP. So that was around the 2010s. The cycle in both cases, S&OP and IBP, typically kind of a monthly replan with tactical plans that were supporting it, sometimes called pre-S&OP, pre-IBP. But fundamentally, the drumbeat was on a monthly cadence. But disruptions due to trade wars and more recently spikes in inflation, the war in Ukraine, each one of these things contributed to a degree of fundamental uncertainty in supply chains that no longer allowed for kind of a luxury, if you will, of a monthly sync. And so getting everybody on the same page once a month at an executive level was just not sufficient. That led a subset of companies who were really forward-thinking to really consider a next reinvention, which was really around even more agility and velocity to assure that they could actually respond to the changes and the disruptions that were happening at a rate that was really consistent with the rate of change itself. So what we're seeing now is that companies are really leveraging digital connectivity and analytics, specifically artificial intelligence and machine learning and simulation combined to not only speed up the drumbeat, but to allow for more optionality and flexibility as these events are by themselves inherently unpredictable and is, that we at 0-100 really think of it as almost a new category of capability that calls for a new name. The goal is still to get together fast, but the drumbeat and the degree of sophistication is so much different than it was even a few years ago that it's time for the next rethink. There are companies doing this, but now there's actually a new need for really a new term to describe what's happening because it is so fundamentally more sophisticated and agile than it was in the past. We're calling it regenerative business planning.
What is 0100 Regenerative Business Planning Framework and how is it different?
The idea is that this is a more adaptive, connected, and fundamentally self-learning, as opposed to just human-based learning system that's leveraging artificial intelligence and machine learning for that purpose. It is, on the one hand, a natural evolution of sales and operations planning and integrated business planning in the sense that it's still about alignment, but the rate of speed and the amount of flexibility and ultimately the amount of regenerated insights that come from leveraging the next generation of digital tools is a step function departure from the legacy conception of a monthly process that is dependent on humans' ability to pick up on the changes in supply and demand that are out there in the marketplace or in the multi-tier supply chain.
What research insights do you have on this shift in planning?
We have three major findings in the research that we do related to the topic at hand. And the first of those is interesting because it's actually drawing a correlation between investments in technology and top-line revenue growth. What's striking is that when we looked across over 10 categories of technology that could be applied to supply chains, the top 4 of those were directly related to planning. And by far the biggest, perhaps not surprisingly when you consider what's going on in the world around us and the volatility that's there, is predictive analytics. Trying to do a better job of forecasting and predicting the future, leveraging advanced analytics is going to have a huge impact on top line as well as bottom line. Second is cloud computing. And that's this idea that if you can actually capture more data points more quickly across stakeholders, then you win because you're actually able to digest that information into your analytical engine. Third is inventory optimization. So no surprise, one of the biggest risks is that you have, when you have a supply-demand mismatch, is you have excess inventory. So that's a key enabler of resilience in supply chains. And last but not least, still in this big top 4, is artificial intelligence itself, right? Which is the engine that drives the others to the next level of predictability, that digests more data points to be able to provide insights to the planners on the front line who are making these big bets.
Let's talk more about the tech stack. For organizations that are on the road to regenerative business planning, I'm just going to say RBP, what tools are in their toolbox and what are they able to do differently?
It's really, in some respects, a top to bottom reinvention that's happening, leveraging technology from the data layer all the way up to the application interface, highlighting a few big changes. I alluded to it, but just to really underline it, the notion of cloud architectures and harvesting data from multiple sources is a fundamental transformation in of itself. The ability to pull from more sources more quickly and dynamically with less effort is enabled by cloud-based data architectures. And oftentimes there's even analytical sophistication within those tool sets that are at the data level. So we've done the data part. The next level in the tech stack is really the so-called solver, which is the ability to take advantage of all of that data that's just been provided, whether that's a weather forecast or a recent history around sales orders, or for that matter, the results of a shipping delay due to a strike at Long Beach in Los Angeles. Any one of those predictive factors is fed through a solver, which in today's terms is modernized because it's both more probabilistic as opposed to just deterministic, to use the fancy terms, which at the end of the day just translates to a better forecast. Now, that's a fundamental shift in terms of just the degree of sophistication behind the algorithms themselves that's tied to a bunch of work that operations researchers have done that's now embedded in software. So leveraging those solvers in their more advanced form has a big step function improvement in terms of the predictive quality of these supply chain plans. Now, the other part of the tech stack that's as important is answering the question, what happens if there is no history, right? What happens if this is a black swan event where, and the pandemic, of course, is the poster child for this, where you can't simply leverage existing data. There is no data because it's a first-time event. It's never happened before. Then what's a really critical complementary skill set in the text and is reflected in the tech stack is so-called simulation. So if the solvers are really about optimizing a plan based on existing data, then simulation allows you to test out edge cases that have never yet happened. And the idea is to have your plans reflective of both so that you're ready for the really big disruptions that have never occurred before, for which there is no playbook, and those that are maybe more variations on a theme tied to some amount of history that's maybe occurred in the past. So simulation and optimization are the next big layers in the tech stack. And then at the very top, you start to get into large language models and the idea of actually at some point starting to not just have to interface with a graphical user interface that was invented by Steve Jobs in 1984, but actually starting to be able to query some of these more advanced planning systems using natural language. So asking a question, like we're having a conversation today, of a very sophisticated system without having to be a sophisticated planner yourself.
What's an example of a global supply chain that's putting these principles into practice?
There isn't any one company doing all of these pieces together in a sort of an integrated fashion. It's really cutting edge on the one hand. On the other, you have companies, and I'll give you Microsoft as maybe the most shining example, that are really pushing the boundaries across each one of the dimensions that I just mentioned, leveraging a substantial portion of the tool sets we just discussed. So during the pandemic, Microsoft itself was, like many companies, facing massive supplier outages happening overnight because people were literally not showing up to work. That was true of, the high-tech sector during the pandemic, consumer packaged goods, industrial and automotive. Every sector was experiencing this. The difference, I think, and why Microsoft's response was exceptional is Donna Wharton, who was the chief supply chain officer at the time, said that we are going to take a blank slate approach to planning. We're going to look end to end from sourcing all the way through to inventory management and shipping and allocation. And we're going to run not a monthly cycle, back to the old days of S&OP, but a daily cycle, a replan end to end, leveraging, again, artificial intelligence to try to figure out what might happen and simulation to prepare for those eventualities that had yet to occur. And doing it in a single solve from the decision around where you source all the way through to how you deploy inventory and how you allocate it on a daily basis. So pretty exceptional. By the way, often the question that comes up and why this is even more extraordinary is, yeah, but was that just a pilot? No, they were actually doing it across 40,000 SKUs on a daily basis across all key stakeholders in their supply chain. So this is not just the art of the possible. Actually, if you take the Microsoft example, it's really happening. And so there is starting to be a pathway to follow here, even though we're really talking about pioneering ground for most.
What's your advice to chief supply chain officers and COOs on how they should evolve their planning capabilities?
So the remit here is not to change everything all at once, right? It's actually to take a phased approach, leveraging, however, the leapfrog opportunity attached to the next generation technology stack. What that means, though, is still it's people at the center. And so when we think about the journey, it really starts with an assessment of the capabilities of your people, the skill sets that you have available to take advantage of artificial intelligence and machine learning, for example, or simulation, these more advanced capabilities. And also the leadership behaviors at the very top, including ourselves, right, in the C-suite, asking the question, are we ready to operate in this more dynamic way and take advantage of the information that's being provided to us and to set the example for our teams around this more agile way of working. And then from a process perspective, it's really being thoughtful and rigorous around how every employee at the line level, as well as in the C-suite, is going to experience this change and how we're going to set individuals up for success, whether those be demand planners, supply planners, or those who are their peers in adjacent functions who have to collaborate closely with the planning function. So if I were to say kind of percentage-wise where most of the investment needs to be, it's going to be maybe 40% on the technology and 60% on how we work. And it's really those people and process dimensions which are really crucial. Phased in, leveraging the learnings from companies like Microsoft around what the North Star ought to be, but at the same time, assessing in a very realistic way where we are today and taking a stepwise approach to driving the change. So that's really the sort of the big picture view of how to de-risk a substantial transformation, but also derive value. The last thing I would say is get started. So the idea of progress is better than perfection is absolutely imperative here too, right? So unleashing small experiments in artificial intelligence, machine learning, assessing teams' ability to make small steps towards improved analytics experience, how to use this next generation of technology is important to start now because it takes a while to embed those kinds of capabilities in the DNA of the organization. And last but not least on that front is really thinking structurally about the operating model and how to propagate these capabilities in a consistent way that actually scales across diverse organizations with distinct. So change management writ large, really crucial in this whole journey.
What are the key questions our 0-100 community should ask themselves as they explore RBP and rethink their planning capabilities?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's really 5 key questions to ask, regardless of where you are on the journey. And the first is really thinking architecturally. Do you have a future-ready planning architecture that is, if not evolved towards that future state tech stack, at least will accommodate it? So that's number 1. And 2 is, do you have the right decision processes and forums at the executive level to capitalize on this information? So you could provide great insights, but you also need a great forum to be able to receive those insights and the right operating norms to have the right conversations to take advantage of the inevitable trade-offs that information is serving up to you. So that's number 2. Number 3 is, have you benchmarked and planned for artificial intelligence and machine learning specifically competencies within your team at all levels? That may be a significant upskilling opportunity. And so thinking early about how you educate and invest in the education around that particular competency is crucial. Number 4 really is the change management question. So what we know is that change management doesn't happen in aggregate level. It actually happens at the line level with individuals whose hearts and minds we need to capture to drive these big transformations, but also to set them up for success. So are you executing change management with the rigor and the level of granularity that's necessary to really drive adoption and help those individuals at the sort of line level actually be successful on this journey? And last but not least is, are you sponsoring and resourcing the data transformation? So thinking about the governance of data, this is a classic case of risk of garbage in, garbage out, right? Are you putting in place the mechanisms to assure that the data is comprehensive, it's clean, it's robust? That's not itself a small journey, but to take advantage of these more sophisticated tools, it's going to be crucial that you have stable data underneath you. And so thinking about the operating model around data management holistically and rigorously is the last important question in this whole exercise.
Thanks for joining me today, Steve. I know our 0-100 community is excited to read your forthcoming report on the topic.
Thanks for having me, Catherine. Excited to share the research with you and look forward to talking soon.
Next, let's speak with Juan Carlos from Unilever about their new tech stack and how it's advancing their planning and execution. Hi, Juan Carlos. It's great to have you here and work together again. Obviously, we know each other, but could you please introduce yourself to our audience?
My name is Juan Carlos Parada. Since July last year, I'm in charge of running global customer operations for Unilever.
Tell us about Unilever's customer operations transformation.
In terms of transformation, it's a response of all this difficult environment that we are seeing out there. In general terms, you might want to think that our response is based in 2 major factors. One, to simplify the decision-making process, and the other is to digitize at scale. With the Compass Org model, there are 2 breakthrough interventions. The first one is the elimination of the matrix. So we really simplify the decision-making process, focusing 5 business groups that act as end-to-end companies, and we are enabling all them to really be agile, simple, and faster in that decision-making process. The second breakthrough intervention is the creation of Unilever Business Operations, where we are leveraging the scale of One Unilever, and we are putting together functions like supply chain and IT to really create a digital powerhouse and be able to quickly digitize Unilever at a speed and at a huge scale.
Unilever's recent move to the cloud was actually one of the biggest cloud migrations in the industry. Is that correct?
To fully digitize the company. We have been building a massive data lake, and we have been putting all the operations there. But it was a big step that we took in April 23 in a strong collaboration with Accenture and Microsoft, in which we moved all the operations of the company to the cloud without any business disruption. This is the largest move in the CPG industry of its kind, and it has enabled Unilever to be a fully cloud-based enterprise today.
How is Unilever using artificial intelligence today? Where is it being applied, and how is it helping?
We had over 1 million of decisions that we have to make to optimize the operation. 65% of those decisions were made by our artificial intelligence engine. 2 years ago, that number was only 10%. But now, if you think that 65% of more than 1 million of decisions have been made by the system, I can tell you that also our users were able to take care of 5% of the decisions, which means that another 33% of decisions that we could optimize are still unattended. Then you see the magnitude of the real meaning of artificial intelligence when it comes to massify the amount of decisions and really perfect the supply. And this is something that human beings, we don't have the capability to do that, as you can tell by the numbers. This year, only up to April, we have already more than, in the same scale, more than 400,000 decisions that have been made with more than 65%, again, and keeps growing in terms of the system to decide. So bottom line, we are well on our way to almost duplicate the amount of decisions that the system is considering and putting them full in automation. When it comes to another example of how are we using artificial intelligence and what we are learning, in our Mexico example of customer connectivity, we are creating every day a forecast of 3.2 million combination of SKUs by store. And we are creating that forecast touchless, without any human intervention, and bringing it internally to our planning systems to create a single one supply chain process. But to perfect that production planning, order management, perfect truck design, and everything that happens in the end-to-end supply chain planning and execution, this is creating a total of 12.5 billion iterations per day to synchronize the whole system. So we are talking about big numbers per day. And then the key point that I'm extracting from all this is that the real benefit behind artificial intelligence is being able to cope with a number of decisions that in our dreams we would have taken care of. And this is only increasing to whole new levels as the complexity of the market grows, the complexity of our customer needs grows, and the disruption continues to be a commonplace in our industry.
What does it look like working with various tech partners to bring a lot of different technologies together for your organization?
In our customer operations architecture, we have a selection of suppliers, some of them for the foundational operations, some of them for hyperautomation, some of them for artificial intelligence. We have a cognitive layer, and we have selected suppliers like Microsoft Azure or Aera to help us with the cognitive layer. We are also working with Salesforce. Overall, most of the developments today in terms of specific skills by blocks of the supply chain, the global rollout of one supply chain project, and elements of optimization and hyper-automation across the different blocks of the value chain, we're leveraging our partnership with Aera, who is our preferred supplier for this kind of developments in artificial intelligence.
What's next on the horizon for Unilever?
We want to focus really in the consolidation of our hubs with a full rollout of the technology, increase significantly the percentage of standardization of our processes, and increase significantly the level of rigor and adoption of those processes. That will give us the base of digitization at a scale necessary for the big ambition of making a fully digitized Unilever. But also it will create more and more conditions of high resilience in which the different hubs and the different operations across the globe will be able to support each other. So with that, our resilience will be taken to unprecedented levels. Also, I want to continue to train people and to create evolution for more and more adoption of skills. So we have selected in the short term to digitize the company and advance in the Project Sky with the top key customers globally in the following 24 months. When we go beyond 24 months, what we want to do is basically evolve the 7 hubs to one single virtual hub. And with that, it will create not only the conditions of resilience that I spoke about, it will also create the conditions for fast, almost immediate rollout of technologies globally, a key competitive advantage because today it could take us years to roll out a technology globally. Today is taking months. Tomorrow could take hours or days And what we expect is faster development of technologies, more disruptions, so we believe this is a competitive advantage. And the second point is crystallize in full our aim to become a fully integrated ecosystem of Unilever and our customers and suppliers with full connectivity as one supply chain. So creating a real end-to-end value network operation, fully digitized and based on artificial intelligence.
Thank you, Juan Carlos, for joining me today and sharing your journey so far. I'm looking forward to hearing more about what comes next. Finally, let's hear from Era Technologies CEO Fred. He and I spoke recently about how the company's AI technology is improving and scaling enterprise decision-making. Fred, can you introduce yourself?
Fred Laluyaux, and I'm the CEO of Era Technology.
Fred, nice to see you, as always. Can you just tell us a little bit more about Era and what it is that you offer to customers?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. Era, we started that company about 7 years ago with the idea of building a decision intelligence platform. So what does that mean? And why did we do that? We realized over the last couple of decades that there was an inflection point coming where the number of decisions that large enterprise will have to make would increase exponentially related to the acceleration of the planning cycles and the business cycles in general, the need to make decisions at a much more granular level for them to be relevant, and the complexity itself of each decisions, the dimensionality, the number of dimensions that you have to assess when you're making a decision is also increasing. So you combine these three factors, faster decisions at a lower level of details, and each of them being more complex and part of an ecosystem, that's a problem. And historically, you solve that problem by asking people, organizing teams in large organizations, sitting on top of a bedrock of transactional systems, ERPs, with a set of bespoke applications, MRP, WMS, TMS, you name it, to actually make these decisions. But we saw the imbalance between the demand for decisions and the supply growing exponentially. And we also saw that the digital native companies, those who were not having to do a lot of change management to get access to technology, those who started with technology at their core, were gaining a massive advantage. So Era was built really about 6-7 years ago with the idea of providing a decision intelligence platform. It's called the Era Decision Cloud, to enable large non-digital native companies in multiple sectors to actually operate like a truly digital native company.
So that sounds great. I mean, how else does your company enable resilience for your customers as well?
Yeah, so if you think about resilience, right, it's the ability to weather events that you're not expecting. So what is an event? Is a set of elements that are hitting you and you have to react. And react means people have to analyze the situation, make decisions, and sometimes those decisions require one person to approve. Sometimes there is a quorum that has to be put together. So by the nature of what we do, by digitizing those decisions from the signal that's being perceived in the market all the way down to the decision and the execution, Era takes care of that. So we have a large number of decisions to make in a short amount of time in a way that's normalized, that you can understand. This is exactly what Era does. So we saw it during COVID. We saw it during a lot of crisis. We didn't build Era with the idea of providing a short-term crisis mitigation solution. We built Era with the idea that, as I explained before, massive amount of data coming in, massive amount of decisions have to be made, not enough people to make it intelligently, tribal knowledge being lost, quality of the decisions going down. But when you apply the technology that we built in the context of the crisis to make a supply chain more resilient, it perfectly works.
And are you helping supply chains become more responsive as well?
Same thing, right? More responsive, again, from the moment you detect an element of disruption to the moment you actually execute the decision. If that chain is actually digitized and traceable and controlled, and I insist on the execution of the decision, right? So it's one thing to understand how decisions are being made, but it's another to ensure that once they're made, they're actually properly executed. And the digital tool doesn't have biases at that point, right? You say, we're going to do it that way. the system actually execute what you want it to execute.
Absolutely. And then some of the customers that you work with have big sustainability commitments as well. Is Era technology, is this helping companies sort of meet these targets as well?
Yeah, it's one of the elements that helps. So again, if you think about what create waste, there's a lot of inefficiencies, right? You bring raw material, you transform it, you make it a product, and you have to most efficiently make that product available to the consumer. That's basically what organizations are doing. And the problem is that through that simple chain that I've just described, there are a lot of silos. And at the intersection of these silos, you find a lot of inefficiencies. With the ability to look through the value chain and identify opportunities, the system can actually cut those inefficiencies. So the effect is really reducing the amount of raw material that you need to actually produce, so cutting waste. It's also making more optimal decisions. If you want to optimize your carbon footprint and you're looking at the decision that you're making, people are wired to think cash, cost, service level. I'm going to make sure that the product is in front of the consumer, otherwise I'm going to get penalized. But maybe by being able to analyze in real time what is in transit, what's being ordered, what trade-offs you could do, and those are fairly complex processes. You can actually, one a decision at a time, improve the way you limit your carbon footprint. So it's a lot of small things that, when added, really help cut waste, improve your carbon footprint, and so on and so forth.
Absolutely. And it sounds like you work with a lot of supply chain leaders. So in your view, what should supply chain leaders be doing right now?
Well, they're very busy people and they're doing a lot of things. So I know the angle that we want them to focus on because we believe it's fundamental. And so one we've been describing is digitizing their decision-making process. I think there is a clear realization that just providing better tools for people to make better decisions is reached a peak, right? We can't actually ask people to work better and faster by just giving them more tools and more collaboration platform and more analytics and more planning. At some point, it doesn't work. And you combine that with the fact that there is a loss of the tribal knowledge in large organizations because people don't want to be doing this dull work over and over, and they just move on, right, and take another job. So you're seeing a loss in tribal knowledge. One of our clients were saying, we have thousands of planners, and fundamentally, they don't know how to plan anymore. It's not their fault. It's gotten too complicated too fast. And the human brain is not wired for that. So let's use the humans for what they're really good at, and let's use the machines. We talk about going from people making decisions supported by systems to those systems making the decisions and executing decisions, but guided by people. So I think that transition has started. I think the digital native companies have demonstrated the value of that model. And when you look at the market cap of the digital natives, it's phenomenal. So understanding the technology, understanding what's out there, what is possible, the art of the possible, which by definition means it's doable, and starting on that journey is really critical.
And it sounds like, roles must be changing, right, in the supply chain. So, with the advancements in technology, are you seeing that people's roles are completely changing?
We actually are seeing not even roles changing, but new roles being created. If you think about it, understanding how decisions are made, not on a specific topic, but in general, being a decision architect, as we call it, the person who's going to say, how are we going to go about improving the way we make decisions on that specific topic? Are we going top down? Are we going bottom up? What makes more sense? What is the logic that we want to deploy? By top down, I mean, you're going to deploy a framework on how decisions are made across, several countries or market units. Bottom up is understanding the minutiae of how each decision is made. Maybe the way you do a decision in France is different than in Belgium, even though it's very close, and you want to digitize that. So all that process requires a new role called a decision architect. There's also a decision analyst, the person who actually sits behind those systems and understands in real time the value that's being created by this technology. And then those roles are transversal. So for many, many years, we've allowed people to be very specialized. You have your planner, you have your logistician. Today, those new roles, it's transversal. And the impact of that is actually, a note that I don't talk about data scientists or data analysts, those roles are already out there. But there's a new set of roles that are being created. And I think embracing that early is really, really important.
Definitely, and super interesting. And what else? Are there any other sort of technology or digital solutions out there that are moving supply chains forwards as well?
Technology is everywhere in supply chain. There is from IoT and digital twins. Fundamentally, people talk about digital twin. What do we mean by that? Is the ability to simulate a situation to then operationalize it, as opposed to do something and then control if we've done it right or not. So those technologies have massive impact. And I would think IoT, but there's so much that can be done right now to also leveraging ChatGPT and all these new technology that are going to demystify basically and make the user interface to these technologies so much easier. I think we're at an inflection point. I think the way I grew up and what I've learned to do and the way I've learned how to work is about to be profoundly disrupted. And I think for the better.
Okay, sounds good. And then just for one final question from me. So if you had a magic wand, what would you wish for in the field of supply chain?
It's a very good question. Magic wand in the field of supply chain. I think it goes a bit beyond supply chain, but I would maybe remove the fear of change. And I think a lot of organizations have done a lot of attempts over the last many years with data lakes and data science and bunch of applications, and they feel like they're not moving fast enough. Sometimes it'll feel like we've tried a lot of things. I've seen for the last few weeks and months, like maybe with the emergence of ChatGPT, that just shows how technology has evolved. This disconnect with executives saying it's time to go, and we're not scared, and we can actually implement those technologies, and it's doable, and it's going to create value, and it's going to reduce waste, and it's going to be better for the planet. It's going to be the end of dull, repetitive tasks in large enterprises. It's going to be a way to attract and retain talent. They have to get started, and those who are doing it are seeing the results today.
Great. Well, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Today, we discussed how supply chain planning and execution is being powered by new frameworks and technologies. We share perspectives from our 0-100 framework on regenerative business planning, from Unilever's business transformation, and from Era Technologies' decision management software. We can see how planning and execution are evolving to drive new levels of agility and resilience in our global supply chains. Thank you, Steve, Juan Carlos, and Fred, as well as our production team for their work on today's episode. We hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time, hopefully when someone else is doing the hosting duties.